You know, there is a university of astrology learning in the Old Soul, New Soul podcast with Robert Glasscock. And now we created a free PDF of all the episodes by date and by title. We discovered that many of today's listeners have not heard these early episodes. So grab your free searchable list of all the show topics and take your astrology knowledge up a huge leap now. It's under the freebies tab on funastrology.com. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller back with Robert Glasscock, and we have one of your questions that is not only good, it's timely. We're in Gemini season as this is being recorded, but this could apply, as we're going to discuss, to any of the signs. If you have...
I have a question in regards to someone going through a Jupiter return. I'm actually going through one today, and it's Jupiter in Gemini. So I wanted to know what implications would that be, especially if Jupiter is in its detriment according to Hellenistic astrology.
I love returns, planetary returns, any of them are sort of a cosmic reset for everything that planet symbolizes in your own chart. And with Jupiter, you're talking about expansion, opportunities, growth, travel, both internal travel through higher studies and so on, as well as external travel. And depending on the house that it falls in, Jupiter in Gemini Jupiter period has a 12-year cycle. It spends about 1 year in a sign, 1 year in a house. So anybody having a Jupiter return now can go back 12 years to 2012 and think about what was going on. And the things that you need to consider, I really encourage all of us as astrologers to think for ourselves. If you understand what Jupiter means and symbolizes, both positively and negatively, then you look to the two houses that Jupiter rules in the horoscope. But remember, it is the co-ruler of Pisces, because before we discovered Neptune, Jupiter was the Chaldean ruler of Pisces. So the house where you have Pisces on the cusp and the house where you have Sagittarius on the cusp in your natal chart will also be carried along, the meanings of those houses, with this Jupiter return. And of course, the house that the Jupiter return occurs in is the most directly affected by that. So very often, Jupiter in Gemini, even though it is detrimented, not just in Hellenistic astrology, it's just classically considered to be detrimented in Gemini. And the real reason for that, Jupiter rules the bigger picture. It's higher. It's the opposite of Sagittarius. Gemini is the opposite sign. Sagittarius has to do with looking at the forest. Gemini has to do with looking at the trees. And if you're born with Jupiter in Gemini, one of the reasons it's detrimented is that a person can get all tied up in looking at the trees and miss the significance of the forest, if you will. So the devil is in the details. Classically, with Jupiter and Gemini, people can get very involved with relatively trivial things and, again, miss the bigger picture. Conversely, Jupiter and Gemini can get scattered if it has certain afflictions, so-called, in the birth chart. So it can have trouble finishing things, and it can get mired down in little details that turn out to be in the bigger picture relatively trivial. So it's a matter of prioritizing. But it is an aspect. It's once every 12 years, and it's hugely significant in terms of your own personal growth, probably your financial and professional growth if you're working, and certainly your philosophical, spiritual, and metaphysical growth. Oddly enough, because Jupiter rules Pisces. Pisces, on the so-called negative sign, is a sign of loss and sorrow. So there can be factors in your life or even people in your life that are naturally dying, quote unquote. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily literal deaths. It can if someone is of age and so on, but it means that there are situations and maybe some friendships or maybe some time-wasting pursuits that have no longer have any real value in your life, and they're passing from it. And you're supposed to become conscious of those. How am I wasting my time? Who am I wasting time with? Let those people go gracefully. Let those situations go gracefully and concentrate on the things that are the most valuable to you. So it really is a matter of organization and prioritization a lot, but concentrate on what is coming in, what's new, what's exciting, and what's the most valuable to. And you will find that your own spiritual growth and your spiritual and metaphysical and astrological insights are also expanding in this period. So you are changing. Gemini is a mental sign. It's an intellectual sign. It's also a sign of communications. So become aware that during this Jupiter return in Gemini, you will probably have at least two important monetary and career opportunities or decisions to make. This can be a transition in terms of jobs. It can also mean a promotion or an advancement in terms of jobs. Travel, both internal and external, is sometimes accented with this Jupiter transit too. Even travel for seemingly trivial reasons, to see family and friends and relatives, those can come up. And they may be significant, actually. So those are the main things to concentrate on during this Jupiter return, which is a once every 12-year cosmic reset of opportunity and growth potential.
I've got a question here that I hope I ask correctly. We'll see. So what I'm thinking about is, for all of us, Jupiter is in Gemini as this is being recorded. Last time Jupiter was in Gemini, we've talked about this in previous episodes, was when I started my first podcast, was when I first started narrating audiobooks, for real, et cetera, et cetera. All of the why we're here today stemmed from Jupiter and Gemini back in 2012, as you mentioned. All right. If Jupiter and Gemini anyway, having a positive effect in our life as we look back, if that's let's say a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, if you have a Jupiter return in there, does that kick the octane up? Are we talking an 8 or a 9 or a 10 as far as Jupiter's effect?
Yes, in a sense. I think the real kick up in octane is that you're 12 years older and you're 12 years more mature, and everything that began 12 years ago has matured by 12 years. And so it is ready to be taken to the next level, whatever that is. And Jupiter is of the nature of expansion. So if you began podcasting, I know that you'd started broadcasting much earlier than 12 years ago, but if you began podcasting and audiobooks 12 years ago, now, if you're having that Jupiter return, all of that theme begins to get kicked up and should be expanded, starting now with the whole year between now and next June, when Jupiter leaves Gemini and goes into Cancer. This year is very much about taking everything that you began 12 years ago to the next level and doing it consciously.
So with any return, Jupiter, Saturn, it doesn't matter, any return, you and I both, I know, operate from and view things from this perspective, that the origination points, horary goes to this too, when you sit down to read the chart, the origination point of that Jupiter return would be when it hits the exact degree and minute of where it was in your natal chart. Can that be a birth chart for the signature of that planet for the period that it is orbiting again?
Absolutely. And that's really what I meant when I said it's like a cosmic reset for all the themes related to that planet in return. So with Jupiter here, it's a cosmic reset on your own belief systems about opportunity, expansion, growth. You just relocated, for example, you're in a whole new environment. It's really like a new birth in a lot of sense. And because Jupiter's associated with Sagittarius and Pisces, long distances are involved. Well, you moved across country for one thing, but internally, that's an external symbol of an internal change. Philosophically, spiritually, religiously, metaphysically, your whole outlook changed deeply when you moved to Palm Springs. So everything is being reset now in a whole, it's like a rebirth every 12 years of everything that Jupiter symbolizes and rules in your chart.
Okay, how about another? This is back. Now we're back to Jupiter and Gemini. I know we're kind of hopping around a little bit here. Back to Jupiter and Gemini. Gemini, one thing we didn't talk about was things like siblings, neighbors, family, etc.
Yes. All of those things are emphasized with Jupiter and Gemini, no matter where it falls in your chart. Gemini does rule siblings. It rules relatives. It rules in-laws. It rules neighbors. And most of all, it rules communications. So people who've been, let's say, estranged from siblings or relatives may find themselves coming back into communications with them. And it may be due to some sort of crisis in the relative's life, or it may be in your own life. But in fact, it's usually not in your life so much as in their life. And because Jupiter does rule Pisces, if you've been estranged, for example, from some of these people, including neighbors and relatives and siblings and so on, a crisis in their lives may bring them back into your life in a communicative way through emails, a phone call, a visit, etc., to see if you can restore the relationship by interacting again. And maybe you can, and maybe you can't. And because Jupiter does co-rule Pisces, deaths in the family circle are not inconsistent with this return. It doesn't have to be death. It can sometimes be a serious illness or somebody needing surgery. But those types of crises, if you will, are not atypical under this return transit. And it often can be an opportunity, anyway, to restore communications and connections with people that you have been estranged with. So that's a positive side of it.
Well, and then let me flip that coin, because as we've talked a little bit about on here, really the bulk of the story is on one episode of my Subconscious Mind Mastery podcast. I'm not giving this a lot of energy publicly now, but I had a bump in the road with my family as I was on my way out here. So Jupiter is in Gemini until June of next year, 2025, early June. June 9th, actually, is when it moves into Cancer. So are we talking about what you just said is possible restoration between now and then while I don't have a Jupiter return. My Jupiter's elsewhere, but, well, it's actually in Sagittarius, so you were talking about that as well. Is that what you're talking about, the scope of it? That could be something to watch for between now and a year from now?
Yes, absolutely. And when transiting Jupiter and Gemini is opposite your Jupiter and Sag natally, that's the opposition. So it's a sort of, instead of a return, it's a half of the Jupiter cycle. And the oppositions, too, are polarities. They're much better, really, than a square. A square is absolutely, the elements are in conflict, for example, in a square where they are not in an opposition, generally in opposition, unless it's across the line of signs. The oppositions are a polarity between compatible signs. So Gemini and Sag, fire and air. And of course, fire and air, Sag and Gemini, are passionate, and they usually involve major themes like religion and money and the things that are associated with Jupiter and Sagittarius. But it is about communications. And it can mean also not only an opportunity to restore communications, but it also can often indicate a closure. If situations are irretrievable, then you'll discover it over the next year while Jupiter transits through Gemini and opposes your Jupiter in Sag. But what that is for you is a developmental, it's an opportunity to raise your own consciousness to a much higher level. So you may find people, not just you, but people who have that same opposition may find that they have absolutely outgrown their relatives on some major level. This is Jupiter again, it's expansion. So if you're metaphysical and spiritual, you may find that you have absolutely outgrown the pettiness of a family that's involved in the Gemini negativities, the gossip, the backbiting, the manipulation, the bipolarity, and all of that kind of thing. You've risen above that, and this would be the year where you'll realize there's really no further point. And it doesn't have to be terribly painful, although the original situation might be. As you grow past it, you'll realize in retrospect, this is the best thing that ever happened. I don't have to deal with any of this anymore ever again. So it frees all of that Jupiter energy to be focused on something more positive and creative and expansive in your own life without feeling in debt, let's say, to the past backdrop of events with relatives and so on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And actually, I think you could spin some things around that opposition. I would ask a follow-up question. So then maybe in this situation, the tire blew during the opposition. Maybe it will heal when I have my Jupiter return back in Sagittarius.
Not only maybe, it will heal. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that communications are restored, but it certainly means that internally the healing takes place. This can also indicate, it doesn't have to be in your situation, Jupiter opposite Jupiter can indicate a need for medical attention. And that can be internal, such as seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist to treat mental issues, or it can be seeing a doctor for physical issues. But the same theme is present. Jupiter is very restorative in this way. And when it's in Gemini and opposing Sagittarius, in a way, it's like going to a doctor and having a mole removed that is maybe precancerous, that sort of thing. So you're cutting out something that is no longer positive in your life. And that may be a situation, what you're talking about here is, it's simply, you reach a level where metaphysically and spiritually, you really, if you're growing at all, which is Jupiter's function, you really do outgrow people who are stuck at their own level of development. And in fact, they're not only stuck, but they're negative. And so you can release them without rancor or hostility or any of that. Let them live their lives because you're living your own.
I'm hearing so much of this lately from a lot of people, Robert, of how the timelines, my perspective, timelines are separating. And I'm just hearing this a lot. Thank you for these perspectives. That is excellent. And I hope that answers our question for our listener. If you have one of those and you'd like to pitch it into the hopper here, we run a few weeks behind because of our recording schedule, but we'll get to it if it's a good question that everybody can benefit from. Go to the funastrology.com website. Up at the top left, there's an orange button. You click it. You don't even have to leave your email, and we'll put it on. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.